I came home 2 days early because the fishing was bad and my back was worse. That is the only reason I was standing in my own living room doorway at 10:30 on a Wednesday morning, watching my wife of 31 years sitting on the lap of my daughter's husband, her arms around his neck, her face buried in his shoulder, the two of them so lost in each other that they didn't hear the front door open. I stood there for what felt like an entire lifetime compressed into 30 seconds. My fishing bag dropped from my hand. Neither of them moved. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked back out to my truck, sat in the driveway with the engine off, and stared at the neighbor's oak tree until the leaves stopped moving. My phone was in my shirt pocket. My son had called me twice the night before. I hadn't called back because I figured it could wait until I got home Thursday. Now I understood why he'd called twice. My name is Frank. I'm 62 years old. I retired 3 years ago after spending 27 years as a high school principal in Columbus, Ohio. I built a life I was proud of, a house we owned outright, a small investment account, a daughter named Claire, who I walked down the aisle 4 years ago, crying the whole way, a son named Marcus who never left Columbus, and who I coached in Little League from age 7 to 14 without missing a single Saturday, and a wife, a woman I had loved faithfully, completely, and without reservation since we were both 29 years old at a church potluck in Dublin, Ohio. I drove to a diner on Morse Road and ordered coffee I didn't drink and called my son. He picked up on the first ring. "Dad," he said, and the way he said it, not surprised, not cheerful, just Dad. Like he'd been sitting beside the phone waiting. I knew he already knew. "How long?" I said. He was quiet for a moment. "I think about 7 months, maybe longer. I only found out for certain 6 weeks ago." 6 weeks. My son had been carrying this for 6 weeks, trying to figure out how to tell me. I didn't feel angry at him for that. I felt something closer to heartbreak on his behalf, that this had been his burden too. "I wanted to be sure before I said anything," he said. "I didn't want to blow up your life over something I wasn't certain about." "You're certain now." "Dad, I have photographs. I have a hotel receipt I found in her purse when I was looking for her insurance card after her fender bender last month. I have 3 weeks of location data from the app she asked me to put on her phone last year so she and I could track each other when she was driving alone at night. She forgot I could still see her location." He listed these things quietly, methodically, the way I taught him to approach hard problems when he was growing up. Don't panic. Don't react. Get the facts first. "Where did she tell you she was going?" I asked. "On those nights. Book club, her sisters. The gym." He paused. "She went to the Marriott on Easton 3 times in 4 weeks. Once on a night she told you she was helping Claire plan a baby shower." I looked down at my untouched coffee. Claire was 7 months pregnant with her first child. My first grandchild. And her husband, the man she had chosen, the man I had accepted into my family and treated like a son, had been spending the night at a hotel 12 miles from our house with my wife, while my daughter sat at home with swollen ankles, planning the nursery. I had to breathe for a while before I could speak again. "Have you told your sister?" I said. "No. I was waiting for you." Another pause. "I didn't know how to tell her, Dad. She's 7 months pregnant." I was scared of what it would do to her. I understood that fear. I shared it completely. But I also knew what it would do to Claire if she found out after the baby was born, after we'd all smiled through a Christmas and pretended nothing was happening. That would be a different kind of devastation, not just the betrayal itself, but the knowledge that everyone around her had known and said nothing. "She needs to know," I said. "But not yet. Not until I understand the full picture." "That's why I kept trying to call you last night," Marcus said. "I found something else. Something about him that Claire needs to know that goes beyond the affair." I drove to Marcus's apartment. He had everything laid out on his kitchen table like a case file, printed photographs, 2 hotel receipts, a printed spreadsheet of location data with dates and times, and a folder that he pushed toward me last. "Open that one slowly," he said. Inside was a printed chain of emails. My son-in-law's name was at the top. The emails were between him and a woman I didn't recognize, not my wife. A different woman entirely. The subject line of the first email read, "Timeline for the Lakewood property." I read for 20 minutes without speaking. My son-in-law had been quietly, methodically liquidating a real estate investment that my daughter had inherited from her grandfather 4 years ago, a small rental property in Lakewood that had been in my wife's family for 2 generations. The property had been put in Claire's name at the time of her marriage. Over the past 18 months, he had been in contact with a real estate attorney, not the family attorney, a different one, and had been preparing to sell it. The proceeds, based on the emails Marcus had found, were intended to be transferred to a joint account that my daughter did not know existed. He wasn't just betraying her emotionally. He was stealing from her financially. He had been planning his exit from this marriage before it was even 2 years old. "How did you get these emails?" I asked. "He used Claire's laptop for something last month when his was being repaired." She mentioned it in passing. I asked her if she still had access to his email on it, and she said she didn't know. Turns out the browser had saved his session. Marcus sat down across from me. "I know how it looks. But Dad, he was stealing from her. I couldn't unknow that." I closed the folder. I have always believed in doing things correctly. I spent 27 years teaching young people that integrity is not what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when no one is. So I did not go home and confront my wife that afternoon. I went to see a lawyer first. Then I went to see a retired detective who I'd known for 15 years through the church, a quiet, methodical man named Gerald, who agreed to spend 48 hours confirming what Marcus had already assembled and documenting it in a way that would hold up to scrutiny. Those were the 2 longest days of my life. I stayed at Marcus's apartment. I didn't call my wife. She texted me twice, asking when I'd be home, and I replied both times that the fishing had improved and I was staying an extra day. I don't know where she thought I was. I don't know if she even cared. What I thought about, lying on my son's couch at 2 in the morning, was the day Claire was born. I had been 29 years old and terrified and the most overwhelmed I had ever felt in my life, standing in that hospital hallway with a cup of bad coffee, waiting. And when the nurse came out and said everything was fine and that I could come in, I walked into that room and my wife was holding this small, red, squinting person, and she looked up at me and said, "She's perfect, Frank." And I believed her. I believed in that moment that everything about our life together was exactly as it appeared, honest, chosen, real, 31 years of moments like that. And somewhere in the middle of them, something had gone wrong that I had not seen coming. I am a man of faith. I have attended the same church for 22 years. I believe that God sees the full arc of things when we can only see the moment we're standing in. And sitting in my son's dark apartment in the middle of the night, I tried to hold on to that. I tried to believe that what felt like the destruction of everything was actually the removal of something false, that the life I thought I had was not real, and that what was coming, as painful as it was at least true. On the morning of the 3rd day, Gerald called me with a 4-page summary. It confirmed everything Marcus had found and added 2 more hotel visits we hadn't known about. He had also, through sources I didn't ask about, confirmed that the real estate transaction had not yet been completed. The property was still technically in Claire's name. There was still time to protect her from that part of it. I called my family attorney from the parking lot of a Walgreens. Then I drove home. My wife was in the kitchen when I walked in, making lunch, the radio on low. She turned around and smiled at me, and I thought about how many thousands of times I had walked into this kitchen and seen her turn around and smile at me, and I felt something in my chest that I can only describe as the death of something I had loved very much for a very long time. "You're back early," she said. "I am," I said. I set the folder on the kitchen table. I set Gerald's summary on top of it. I pulled out a chair and sat down, and I said, "I need you to sit across from me, and I need you to be honest with me for the first time in what I now understand has been a very long time." She looked at the folder. She didn't move for a moment. Then she sat down. I'm not going to recount every word of that conversation. Some of it doesn't need to be repeated. What matters is this. She didn't deny it. She said it had been going on for 10 months, not 7. She said it had started as friendship. He had come to her with problems in the marriage, and she had listened, and it had become something else. She said she knew it was wrong. She said she had been trying to find a way to end it. I asked her if she knew about the real estate scheme, about his plan to take Claire's property and disappear. She stared at me. "What are you talking about?" she said. And I watched her face carefully, the way I watched students' faces for 27 years when I was trying to determine whether they were telling the truth or not. I am not a perfect judge of character. This situation had proven that decisively. But her confusion in that moment looked real to me. I don't think she knew. I think she believed she was having an affair with a man who was unhappy in his marriage, not with a man who was methodically looting his wife's inheritance. I slid the email printouts across the table. She read them slowly. The color left her face. He was going to take her property, I said. He was going to leave her with nothing. She's 7 months pregnant, and the man she trusts completely has been planning this since before their second anniversary. My wife put her hands over her mouth. She is your daughter, I said. Whatever you and I are now, whatever has happened between us, she is your daughter. And I need you to understand clearly what you have been participating in, whether you knew about this part or not. I called Claire the following morning and asked if I could come over. I drove to her house alone. I sat across from my daughter at her kitchen table, her belly round under her sweater, her face open and trusting, and I told her everything. Not all at once. I started with what I knew for certain, what was documented, what could not be explained away. I told her about the property, about the account, about the emails. She sat very still. The other part, I said carefully. The part about your mother. I need you to hear that too. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, I already suspected the other part. I hadn't expected that. He's been different for about 4 months, she said, distracted, protective of his phone. Coming home late and having explanations that were technically possible but didn't feel right. I hadn't let myself follow the thought all the way through because of the baby. She looked down at her hands. I didn't think it was Mom. I thought it was someone from work. She didn't cry right away. She sat very still for a long time, the way people do when something has confirmed a fear they'd been living with quietly, when the worst thing they imagined turns out to be true, and the shock of it is almost smaller than expected because part of them already knew. Then she cried for a long time, and I sat with her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Marcus came over that afternoon. The three of us sat in Claire's living room, and for the first time in months, the right people were on the right side of the truth. The legal process took about 6 weeks. My attorney contacted the estate attorney. The transaction was halted. The property remained in Claire's name. Her husband, when confronted with the email evidence, retained his own attorney and said very little publicly. Claire filed for divorce 4 months after the baby was born. The proceedings were not pleasant, but they were clear the documentation was thorough, and his attorney knew it. My wife moved out in November. We filed the paperwork in January. 31 years. I won't tell you it didn't hurt, because it did, every single day of that winter. I'd walk past the kitchen in the morning, and the radio wouldn't be on, and I would feel the absence of it like a physical weight. I'd see something funny during a football game, and turn to say something to someone who wasn't there. Those moments don't announce themselves. They just arrive. But I also want to tell you what else happened. Claire named the baby Thomas. He came into the world healthy and loud, with his grandfather's nose, according to Marcus, and his great-grandmother's hands, according to a photograph Claire dug out of an old album. I was in the waiting room when he was born, same hospital, different waiting room, 32 years later. And when Claire's nurse came to get me, I walked into that room and my daughter was holding this small, red, squinting person, and she looked up at me and said, "He's perfect, Dad." And I believed her. She and Thomas moved into the house with me for 3 months while her divorce proceedings were active. We ate breakfast together every morning. I learned how to operate a baby monitor. I learned that Thomas slept better with white noise and that Claire took her coffee with exactly 1 sugar, and that my daughter, my adult daughter, whom I had somehow seen more as my little girl than as the woman she had become, was one of the strongest people I had ever known in my life. Marcus came over on Sunday afternoons, and we watched football and ate too much and let Thomas sleep on whoever's chest he would tolerate, which was usually mine. My son has my mother's patience and his grandfather's quiet humor. And sitting in my living room on those Sunday afternoons, I understood that I had built something worth keeping. Not the marriage I thought I had, but something real. My children, my grandson, my faith, my own integrity, which I had maintained through the worst season of my life and which no one could take from me. I also want to say this, because I think it matters. My wife and I have spoken several times since everything resolved. I don't hate her. Hate requires energy I would rather spend on Thomas. What she did caused enormous damage to this family, to our daughter most of all, and she will carry that, and she should. But she is also a person I spent 31 years with, and I know her well enough to know that she has lived with consequences she did not anticipate, and that the grief of losing Claire's trust is something she will not recover from quickly or easily. I am not her judge. I leave that to a higher authority than myself. What I am is a grandfather now. That is the title I carry into every room these days, and I do not take it lightly. The house is different than it was. Quieter in some ways, louder in others because Thomas visits 4 times a week and has discovered that the kitchen pots make excellent percussion instruments. I repainted the living room last spring. I joined a men's group at church that meets Thursday mornings. I started going back to the golf course for the first time in years, badly, happily, with Gerald, the retired detective who has turned out to be an excellent friend and a terrible golfer. Marcus told me recently that he had been scared those 6 weeks before I came home from the fishing trip, that he had lain awake at night trying to figure out the right thing to do and had landed every time on the same answer: tell your father the truth and let him decide. He said, I knew you could handle it. I just needed to make sure you weren't handling it alone. I have thought about those words many times since he said them. There is something about a son who trusts his father with the worst news he's ever had to carry. Something about a daughter who holds herself together through heartbreak and deception and a difficult birth and a harder divorce and still shows up at the breakfast table every morning with her chin up. Something about a grandchild who does not know any of this, who knows only that when he is tired, the best place in the world is on his grandfather's chest, with the sound of a heartbeat and the smell of old wood and coffee and whatever it is that home smells like when it is real. I came home 2 days early from a fishing trip because the weather was bad and my back was worse. I walked into my living room and the life I thought I had collapsed in front of me in 30 seconds. And I want to tell anyone who is sitting where I was sitting, in a diner parking lot with cold coffee and a phone call, they're afraid to make that the collapse of something false is not the end of everything. It is the beginning of something that will take time and cost something real, and hurt in ways you won't always be able to predict or prepare for. But on the other side of it, if you do it with integrity, if you do it with the people who are truly yours, standing beside you, on the other side of it is Thomas, asleep on your chest on a Sunday afternoon, completely at peace with the world, trusting you entirely. That is enough. That is more than enough. Before I go, I want to ask you something. If you found yourself in a situation where the truth would hurt the people you love most, would you still choose to tell it? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you today, consider becoming part of the MT-Sweetrevenge family. The link is right below this video. We'll see you in the next one.